Zuma is said to have spent 30 million rand in legal costs at the expense of taxpayers. And joining us to discuss this, we are joined by political analyst Khanya Bonani. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Morning.
It's bright and early. I see we're also adhering to the social distancing. But
Yeah.
Khanya, let's get into this. Perhaps before we look at the actual meaning of the judgment, contextualize what exactly transpired on the timeline. You know, when that 29th of July tweet was issued by former President Jacob Zuma, how did we end up ahead of this judgment?
So I think what we need to remember is that this tweet sort of came out after Zuma had taken the stand for the State Capture Commission, the Zondo Commission.
Yeah.
Right? So essentially part of not just, you know, his testimony, but also Julius Malema, who somehow completely negated in all of this mess, even though he started this mess, had sent out tweets saying, well, there's been a timeline around Derek Hanekom, and there are a lot of people who say not to trust him. There's a lot of literature. There are former presidents who've said, do not trust this man. And Jacob Zuma, when he took the stand, was like, well, there are a lot of people that I don't trust and think are known enemies to the state who could be spies. And he went ahead and listed all of them and then decided to re-embolden that statement on social media. So after that initial tweet, and obviously Derek Hanekom not taking kindly to that and setting up setting up defamation charges, we find ourselves, you know, from July to November in this tussle.
Yes.
Back and forth, where Jacob Zuma loses the bid in terms of the case itself. And obviously, Derek Hanekom doesn't just only set defamation charges for 500,000 rand, which we now know will go to Corruption Watch. He also wants a public apology, which obviously for Jacob Zuma is humiliating, but taking the L doesn't seem to be something that he's used to, because now we see that he's gone to the Supreme Court of Appeal, which he has now lost, because the Supreme Court of Appeal didn't see a reason or a means for the case to even go forward. There was not a strong enough case, even though his lawyers, Zuma's lawyers, said that the tweet was taken out of context and it wasn't necessarily to incite that he was an apartheid spy. But obviously, saying that you're a known enemy of the state does incite a little bit of unwelcomed attention. Not just in terms of your defamation of character and obviously your reputation, but when you talk about things like being a spy, especially in the South African context, it becomes very dangerous on the other hand, because you're now essentially delegitimizing somebody's struggle credentials. Well, at least that's what Derek Hanekom thinks. So in Jacob Zuma losing this bid, he only has the option to go to the Constitutional Court and appeal it there. And the only reason why Jacob Zuma's lawyers have a case is that they say that the other half of the judgment was that Jacob Zuma would first of all retract the tweet, apologize, but also not mention or utter the words Derek Hanekom and apartheid spy in the same sentence again. So they think that that's an infringement on freedom of speech. And I'm not quite sure if they are going to go that route, because we haven't seen a public apology, nor have we seen the infamous tweets deleted in the last 48 hours. It seems like Derek Hanekom's team from Weber Wenzels is also looking to sue if he doesn't make a move. So Monday is going to be a very interesting day.
So you managed to unpack, Zuma's options after the Supreme Court of Appeal failed. You've also spoken about, his arguments in the case that it infringes on his freedom of speech and also, quoting the tweet, known enemy agent. I just wanted to know about the point that he's arguing, former President Jacob Zuma and his arguments. What do you make of that? How do you analyze it when he says it was taken out of context, based on the fact that you said obviously it discredits someone's struggle credentials, etc. But how valid do you think is his argument on that front?
To be quite honest, I viewed the former president right now as somebody who's a man on the ropes. You think about a boxing fight right now, and he has many legal battles that he's taking on all at the same time, and I think he's a bit frustrated, and I think I've seen it. I think I see it more in this case, where you can see signs of frustration, not just from the legal team and how the judiciary handle his cases, but also, in how he responds to some of the losses. In the past week, even in the build-up to this outcome from the Supreme Court of Appeal, he mentions how, justice feels the same way that it did, prior to 1994. Obviously, speaking to the build-up to the arms deal case and other impending sort of matters that he has to face. I think the out of context here, I can't side with him on that because I understand the fact that he was on the stand for the Zondo Commission and it shouldn't have been used against him. But the problem lies in the fact that he pointed a lot of fingers without thinking there'd be consequences for that. And the fact that he has used state money not just to defend all of these cases but hasn't paid it back doesn't really help matters as well. If you're going to want sympathy and want people to investigate elsewhere, you need to do a better job of creating a different suspect at the very least, but that suspect needs to have actual claims behind, why they would be a known enemy to the state or why they would have been an informant. It's one thing to just talk about it in passing, but it's another when you're under oath.
Let's look at your response. I mean, what is your take on this judgment? Ultimately, what do you think it sets the precedent for, this scenario occurring in the future, perhaps against other parties?
I think it's going to be an interesting precedent, especially because it may land Jacob Zuma back into court again. I mean, I think about the video series that Liezle Zuma is currently airing on his YouTube channel with Zooming with the Zumas, where again, quite a number of allegations are being put out there. I'm not questioning the institutional memory that Jacob Zuma has, not just as a former president, but also as a former MK intelligence, head, right? The Mozambique mission. I understand his credentials, but at the same time, he doesn't have a lot of people who are backing him. Like, all you need is 2 to 3 people in the political environment who can say, I can attest that 1, 2, 3 happened, and perhaps we should consider this. Whilst I believe that Jacob Zuma is going to have to learn a very hard lesson from this, at the same time, the cards are falling the way that they are because of how his presidency ended and how state capture has now embroiled him in not just this particular fight, which seems very small, but it seems as if he's created a lot of enemies along the road, and people are just waiting for him to say something so that they can pin him on it. So I think this president may come back to haunt him in the future, but at this point, let's see if we can make it back to the state inquiry stand.
Well, Khanya, as you mentioned, it's another legal setback for the former president. Just quickly, I want to know in conclusion, you mentioned the costs that this has had on the taxpayers. It's literally been at the expense of taxpayers. Going forward, should he take the option of perhaps, taking it to the Constitutional Court or, exercising further legal rights? I mean, what does that scenario look like for the former president going forward?
Ordinarily, I would say he's on his own. He needs to pay for his own legal costs. But unfortunately, he also happens to be a former head of state, which comes with its own package, in the background, not just in terms of security and staff and, ensuring that he's taken care of. But we're talking about, having to deal with, we've never had a former president that's had so many legal battles, right? And I think the line that needs to be drawn in the sand is, at what point do you become the entity, the individual, rather than the former president?
Political analyst Khanya Bonani again speaking to us here on Newzroom Africa about former President Jacob Zuma's failed appeal against Derek Hanekom, also demanding an apology, for a public apology, and to have the original tweet deleted. Always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much for joining us.